Alright, hello, my name is Gabriel Grindstaff. This video is for my GCU class, GOM 263, and I'll start the video by discussing Laura Bohan's article, Shakespeare in the Bush. I have all my notes written down, so I may be looking back and forth. I'll start with a brief summary of the story, talk about the worldviews, shapes, cultures, interpretations, identify the ethnic basis, and reflect on the stories teaches us about communication and understanding across cultures. So we'll start. In Shakespeare in the Bush, anthropologist Laura Bohan shares her experiences telling stories of Hamlet to the Tiv people of West Africa. She expected the story's meaning to be universal, that everyone, regardless of culture, would understand Shakespeare's themes the same way. However, as she told the stories, the Tiv interpreted key parts differently based on their cultural beliefs. For example, they believed ghosts weren't real, assumed Hamlet's mother was right to marry her late husband's brother, and thought Hamlet's behavior was foolish. Through these experiences, Bohan realized that the cultural values and worldviews strongly influence how people understood stories, even those considered universal. Secondly, this article shows that worldviews directly shape how we interpret meaning. The Tiv saw Hamlet through their own cultural lens, one built on belief about family, power, and the spirit of the world. What Bohan considered betrayal or madness, the Tiv saw as rational or even honorable. Their interpretation was wrong. It simply reflects their worldviews. This demonstrates that the meaning isn't fixed or universal. It's filtered through each cultural values and experiences. An ethnocentric bias in the article comes from Bohan's assumption that Shakespeare's stories are universal, understandable, and that her interpretation was the correct one. She believed Western literature and logic could be understood the same way anywhere. However, this assumption overlooked how deeply cultural beliefs shaped interpretation. Bohan's bias shows how easily it is to assume our own cultural perspective in the most rational or accurate, even when engaging with others respectfully. Challenging the ideas of one culture is normal. The story clearly challenges the idea that one's own culture represents the normal way to see the world. Bohan learned that what seems obvious or moral in one's cultures might seem confusing or even wrong in another's. The Tiv's different understanding of Hamlet revealed that the cultural value, not universal truth, often define what people see as right or wrong or logical. In my own culture, for example, we often emphasize individual choice, like choosing our own career or partner, and we see that as a freedom. But someone from cultures that values family or unity or arranged marriages might see that as selfish or irresponsible. The same action that can carry opposite meaning depending on worldviews, just like the Tiv interpreted Hamlet differently from Bohanan. A best practice or communicating across cultures is to approach every conversation with humility and willingness to listen. We should assume that our way of understanding is universal. In articles, Bohanan's experiences show the values of patience and curiosity. Instead of insisting that the Tiv people were wrong, she learned from their interpretations in the real world communication, asking open-ended questions like what does this mean to you, can bridge cultural gaps and create mutual understanding. I've had similar experiences when working with people from another culture who had different ideas about what time and punctuality. I used to think being 5 minutes late was rude, but for them, time was more flexible and based on relationships rather than strict schedules. Like Bohannon, I realized that my assumptions about what's normal come from my own culture. Once I understood their worldviews, I could communicate more effectively and respectfully. In conclusion, the biggest lesson I've learned in Shakespeare in the Bush, is that worldviews deeply shape perception, even of things we think are universal, like stories, morals, or logic. Bohannon's experiences remind us understanding across cultures requires humility, patience, and willingness to see the world through someone else's eyes. When we approach intercultural communications this way, we only learn more about others. Not only do we learn more about others, but also gain the insight to our own worldviews. Thank you, and this was my take on Shakespeare in the Bush.